"You don't deserve a penny, Dad." That's what my daughter said before I even sat down in that glass-walled office 60 floors above Park Avenue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The marble table did the shouting for her. The skyline did the rest. Her diamond bracelets flashed like traffic lights, warning me to stop where I stood. 18 years since our last real conversation, and the first words out of her mouth were a verdict. I looked at my reflection in the window, old Chevy keys, frayed cuffs, a face carved by California sun, and wondered how a man could be that close to Central Park and still feel like he was 1,000 miles from home. Then the lawyer opened a thick envelope, and the room learned how to hold its breath. "My name is Thomas Caldwell, 72. I spent 40 years drawing straight lines on crooked ground bridges, seawalls, foundations that didn't flinch when the earth did. After the divorce, I moved west, traded Manhattan elevators for Santa Monica stairs and boardrooms for toolboxes. My ex-wife Evelyn stayed east and built towers with her name on the glass. My daughter Vanessa learned to speak the language of donors and directors. I learned to fix things that leaked. The office looked like a museum that had never forgiven fingerprints Italian stone cold as the face it wore. A painting that was probably worth more than my building ever was. Chairs that sighed when you sat like they were tired of the unimportant. I stood there in my thrift store blazer holding a paper cup of lobby coffee while a receptionist with a perfect bun offered me a bottled water from a tray of sparkling and still like the choice mattered. "Can we not make a scene?" Vanessa said, without looking up from her phone. "I have a gala at 5. I sat. The chair did not squeak. Outside Central Park was a folded green napkin beneath the silverware of the city. Vanessa finally gave me her eyes cool, exacting the kind that edited people out of pictures before the photo was taken. "You were told this meeting was a formality," she said. "Mother handled everything." The lawyer Harold Pierce cleared his throat, the practiced baritone of a man who'd read the end of a lot of family stories. He lined up the folders as if their corners could keep us civil. "Mrs. Caldwell left very specific instructions," he said. Vanessa leaned back, a silk storm. Of course she did. I looked down at my hands. Knuckles scarred by 1,000 small arguments, with stubborn wood and unforgiving steel. The room smelled faintly of new leather and old money. Somewhere below, a siren blinked its way through traffic. Up here, the only emergency was the truth. It's a strange thing walking into a life you walked out of. You notice the upgrades. The pen Harold set in front of me was heavy enough to anchor a small boat. The water on the tray had a foreign label and a mountain on it. The air felt expensive. My heartbeat did not. "I want it on record," Vanessa said, "that he has no legal claim expectation, or Miss Caldwell." Harold interrupted gently, "Your mother's language will speak for itself." Vanessa's mouth did a careful, practiced smile. It always did. I thought of the last time I saw Evelyn without a crowd. No cameras, no donors, just a morning in Queens, long before the glass, before the skyline knew our name. We argued about money we didn't have and plans we couldn't afford, then went to work anyway. Some foundations crack slowly, some crack in a single sentence. The conference room lights reflected in the window, like a constellation designed to impress investors. I could see the ghost of my face floating over the park, a man who used to measure twice and cut once, who now measured his words and tried not to use them at all. The receptionist brought a silver plate of macarons as if sugar could neutralize history. I passed. Vanessa didn't. "Let's get this over with," she said, dusting a crumb from couture black. "Some of us still have a company to run." Harold opened the envelope with a letter opener shaped like a small sword. Fitting, I thought. We were all pretending this wasn't about a battle. He lifted the first page. The paper had that thick, expensive weight that makes ordinary sentences sound like law. Vanessa put down her phone. Even the air leaned in. I looked out at the park one more time and found my reflection again. Chevy keys, frayed cuffs, California sun. A man who built things you couldn't see after they were done. Footings, piles, work that held up other people's glory. I felt oddly calm. Whatever came next would not be mine to control. It never had been. Before I read, Harold said Mrs. Caldwell asked that today proceed in a specific order. I'd appreciate your patience. Vanessa exhaled through a smile. Read. I folded my hands, found the steady in my breath, and let the room do what it wanted. Outside, a helicopter traced a neat line over the green. Inside, a sentence was about to redraw the map. Before I continue, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. City and state. I want to know which skylines are watching this with me. The sound of that envelope opening was soft, almost polite, like the whisper of a secret too heavy for air. Harold unfolded the pages with the care of a priest turning scripture. Vanessa crossed her legs, designer heels clicking once against the marble sharp as punctuation. Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell, he began, left very specific instructions regarding the reading of her last will and testament. His voice carried that deliberate calm lawyers use when they're stepping into a minefield. I stared at the reflection of the city lights in the table. New York glittered beneath us, like a crown built on broken promises. I never thought I'd be here again in this world of brushed steel and silent judgment. Not after the way it ended. Vanessa's perfume filled the room, expensive, sharp, and cold. It reminded me of the day she told me never to contact her again. The day I left Manhattan behind, with nothing but a toolbox and a half-paid mortgage. She glanced sideways, the same tilt of her mother's head Evelyn used to have when she was about to dismiss someone. "Let's be efficient," Vanessa said. "Dad's time is valuable, I'm sure." I almost laughed. My time had never been valuable to her. Harold's voice steadied. "There are a few preliminary statements to acknowledge." Mrs. Caldwell was of sound mind. This document is dated 6 months prior to her passing, witnessed by 3 independent parties. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "That's nice. Can we get to the actual inheritance?" He nodded slightly but didn't rush. "I'd like to note," Harold continued, "that your mother made clear this process should not be altered or abbreviated. Something about that phrasing made me uneasy. Evelyn never left anything to chance. She planned her business expansions down to the color of the ribbon at every groundbreaking. If she wanted something read in a certain order, there was a reason. The marble beneath my shoes felt colder now, as if the building itself remembered her. She had loved marble floors, said they reflected strength. I used to joke that they also reflected distance, how easy it was to slip when you forgot to look where you were going. Vanessa tapped her nails against her phone. "This is ridiculous. Mom wouldn't have dragged him here unless—" She stopped herself. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but she recovered fast. "She wouldn't," she repeated, quieter. I wanted to tell her I didn't expect anything, that I came because Harold had called and said I should, that I'd almost said no. Because the truth was, I wasn't ready to face the ghosts Evelyn left behind. The last time I saw my ex-wife was at her funeral. Vanessa had made sure I stood far enough from the casket that the photographers wouldn't catch me in the frame. I'd brought white lilies. Evelyn always said roses were for show-offs. When I tried to approach, Vanessa blocked my way. Her voice was all boardroom, now stripped of daughter. "You don't belong here," she said. "Mom didn't want you near her." I had nodded because maybe she was right. Maybe Evelyn hadn't wanted me near the empire she'd built after cutting me loose. I placed the lilies on the side table and walked back to my Chevy, while men in tuxedos whispered my name like it was a rumor. That was 18 months ago. And yet, standing here in her office tower, I could still hear the echo of her funeral heels tapping down the marble path. "Mr. Caldwell?" Harold's voice pulled me back. "Are you comfortable proceeding?" "As comfortable as a man can be on his own execution day," I said softly. He gave me a sympathetic look. He'd known Evelyn before she became the legend on magazine covers, back when we were both scraping drywall off our first building site. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Can we please not drag this out?" The lawyer hesitated, then continued. "Your mother left a message to be read after her will, a recorded statement." Vanessa's head snapped up. "A video of what I'll play it in due time," Harold replied. First, her written provisions. The clock on the wall ticked once, echoing like thunder in that quiet room. I folded my hands to keep them from trembling. It struck me that everything about this place, its gleaming windows, its polished silence, was Evelyn. Perfect. Immaculate. Cold. Even in death, she managed the room. I glanced out through the glass wall. From here, the park looked peaceful, a patch of green pretending the city wasn't built on debt and ambition. Somewhere down there, people were living simple lives, unaware that a man like me was about to lose or gain everything because of a woman he couldn't stop loving even after she stopped loving him. For a moment, I thought about walking out. Leaving before whatever came next could make me smaller. But then I caught sight of my reflection again, aged, weathered, but still standing. I had survived worse than words on paper. Evelyn used to tell me faith was for people who couldn't afford insurance. I'd told her maybe faith is just another kind of foundation, something you don't see, but everything collapses without it. After she left, I lost mine. In God, in people, in myself. But maybe faith doesn't die. Maybe it waits patient as concrete curing in the dark. And maybe this marble floor was about to crack for a reason. I stopped believing in miracles the day she walked away. I thought, watching the lawyer's fingers tremble slightly before the next page. But maybe faith finds you again when you've already given up. Harold cleared his throat, turned the page, and said the words that would change everything. The sound of paper sliding across marble shouldn't have felt like thunder, but it did. Harold's voice was steady, practiced, neutral, like someone reading a weather report right before a hurricane. He started with the easy part: donations to hospitals, endowments to charities, scholarships in Evelyn's name. The kind of gestures that polished reputations and named wings of buildings. Vanessa's posture softened. She smiled faintly, but there. The kind of smile that said everything is going exactly as I planned. Her manicured fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup as she waited for her moment of triumph. Then Harold turned to the second page. His tone didn't change, but the air in the room did. To my daughter, Vanessa Caldwell. He read, "I leave the property at Venice Beach, the accompanying art collection, and the sum of $500,000 provided she serves 3 consecutive years at Caldwell Estates under the supervision of Mr. Thomas Caldwell." The words hung there impossible and undeniable. Vanessa blinked twice. Then her laugh, high, brittle, disbelieving, echoed off the glass. "Under him, you must be joking." Harold didn't flinch. "Those are Mrs. Caldwell's written terms." She must have been delirious. Vanessa turned to me, eyes flashing. "Dad, tell him you had nothing to do with this." "I didn't even know I was in the will," I said quietly. "I'm just as surprised as you are." She stood abruptly, palms flat on the table. "This is ridiculous. Mom would never." "To my ex-husband, Thomas Caldwell." Harold continued, raising his voice just enough to cut through hers. "I leave controlling interest, 51% of Caldwell Estates and all subsidiary holdings valued at $27.4 million. Silence. Real silence. The kind that hums. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My ears rang like someone had struck a bell inside my skull. $27 million. 51%. The company she built after she left me. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and grief. Vanessa's mouth fell open. The color drained from her face, leaving her as pale as the marble beneath her. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be right." Harold set the document down. "It's what she wrote, Ms. Caldwell." "She was sick," Vanessa snapped. "She wasn't thinking straight." "This is insane. Your mother was lucid when she signed the document," Harold said calmly. "She reaffirmed it 3 months later. I was present." Vanessa shook her head so violently, her earrings caught the light like tiny bursts of fire. She hated him. She said she'd never forgive him. I wanted to say I didn't blame her for hating me. We'd both done damage, but I couldn't speak. My throat had gone dry. For 20 years, Evelyn's empire had been a distant skyline I watched from the shore. Now it was being dropped into my lap like a burning city. Harold looked at me gently. "Mr. Caldwell, I'll need your signature confirming receipt of these terms." The pen felt heavy in my hand, heavier than any wrench I'd ever held. I signed my name in slow, uneven strokes, the ink spreading like a crack across old stone. Vanessa's voice trembled. "You manipulated her. Somehow you got to her." "I didn't," I said softly. "I hadn't seen your mother in years. She pitied you," she hissed. "That's what this is." "Some twisted guilt trip," Harold interjected before I could respond. Mrs. Caldwell anticipated such a reaction. She left a recorded message to clarify her intentions. Vanessa froze. "A what a video statement," he said. Her exact words recorded 3 weeks before her passing. Her face drained further, then hardened. "Play it. Let's see how far this charade goes." Harold opened his briefcase and lifted out a slim black laptop. His movements were meticulous, almost ceremonial. He set it on the table, connected a small drive, and faced the screen toward us. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint buzz of the city outside, muted by glass and altitude. Then the lights dimmed automatically, the blinds lowering with a quiet hum. The screen glowed. Evelyn appeared frail but unmistakable, sitting upright in a hospital bed, her silver hair swept neatly back. Her eyes, still sharp, still commanding, cut through the years, as if they'd been waiting for this confrontation. "Hello, Vanessa," she began. "And hello, Thomas." Vanessa's breath caught. Mine did too. Her voice was weaker, but every word carried weight. If you're watching this, I'm gone. And I imagine the air in that office is colder than it should be. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Mom! Evelyn smiled faintly on the screen. I know this will be difficult to hear, but what I have to say isn't about comfort. It's about truth. Harold paused the video to glance at both of us. Mrs. Caldwell's message is approximately 23 minutes long. She asked that we view it in full before discussing any objections. Vanessa slumped into her chair, eyes glassy, shoulders rigid. I stared at the frozen frame of my ex-wife on the screen, her eyes fixed right where mine were, and felt time fold in on itself. All the years between the bookstore dream we once shared and the empire she'd built in my absence vanished. And for the first time since she left, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just ready to hear her voice one last time. Harold pressed play. The ghosts of marble floors went silent. The screen flickered once, and then she was there. Evelyn Caldwell framed in the soft light of a hospital room that smelled of endings and antiseptic. Her face was thinner, her eyes sunken but steady. Even dying, she looked like someone who gave orders. Vanessa, she began, voice clear, deliberate. If you're watching this, I know you're angry. You always hated surprises. But some truths have to come when we can't interrupt them. Vanessa's lip quivered. This isn't real, she whispered. But Evelyn's image continued undeterred. You're wondering why I left control of Caldwell Estates to your father, the man I divorced 2 decades ago. I need you to hear this from me, not a lawyer. Because you deserve the truth, even if you hate it. Harold stood quietly in the corner, hands folded in front of him, letting Evelyn's voice carry the room. I didn't build this empire alone, she continued. Thomas laid every foundation I ever stood on, literally. He taught me the value of precision, of promises kept. I forgot those lessons when ambition became my religion. The words hit harder than any accusation ever could. Vanessa sat rigid, staring as though sheer denial could stop the recording. Evelyn's eyes softened. Thomas, I know you won't interrupt me this time because you never did. You let me chase success even when it pulled us apart. You warned me that money built on lies will crumble, and I laughed at you for sounding like a sermon. Her voice faltered. She took a shallow breath before continuing. But you were right. I lost myself, Thomas. The company wasn't born of brilliance. It was built on shortcuts, charm, and favors I never earned the honest way. Vanessa's hands flew to her ears. Stop it. Her voice cracked like glass. Stop it, Mom. Evelyn went on, unblinking, unstoppable. Yes, Vanessa, I had affairs. I made promises to men I didn't love to build a business I couldn't control. I broke your father's trust, and I broke something in you, too. You grew up thinking manipulation was power. I see that now in your eyes, and I hate that it came from me. Vanessa covered her face, shoulders shaking. For the first time since I'd entered that room, I saw not the CEO but the little girl who used to fall asleep on my workbench while I measured blueprints. I'm giving your father this company, Evelyn said, her tone firm again, not because he needs the money, but because he remembers what we lost chasing it. He'll know what to do, whether that means rebuilding it with integrity or tearing it down to start clean. A long silence followed. I realized my hands were trembling on the table's edge. Evelyn leaned closer to the camera. Thomas. If you're watching, forgive me for confusing pride with strength. Forgive me for walking away when you deserved someone who'd stay. You were the honest one. You were always the foundation. Her breathing became labored. The machine beside her beeped steadily, a metronome marking the last confessions of a soul too late to change. She turned her gaze back to Vanessa. Sweetheart, you inherited my ambition, but not my conscience. Don't let greed be the story people tell about you. Work under your father not because you must, but because he'll remind you who you were before the spotlight. Vanessa sobbed silently. Her phone, forgotten, lay face down beside the untouched coffee. And if you both remember nothing else, Evelyn whispered, remember this family doesn't end with failure. It begins again with forgiveness. She reached toward the camera, trembling hand closing the space between worlds. Then the screen went black. No one spoke. Not for a full minute. The hum of the projector filled the room like breathing. I leaned forward, hands clasped, and whispered. She finally told the truth. Vanessa lifted her head, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She ruined everything she hissed, everything she built. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not an enemy, but the last mirror Evelyn left me. She built it wrong, I said quietly. Now maybe we can build it right? Harold exhaled. Mrs. Caldwell requested that we pause here before continuing the rest of her directives. He reached across the table and closed the laptop. The room dimmed further, the last light slipping away like breath. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the tremor in my chest subside. 20 years of questions had just been answered by a ghost. And somehow, instead of victory, all I felt was weight, the kind that settles when truth finally stops running. Outside, the city's noise seeped back in horns, sirens' life continuing, as if nothing monumental had just happened 60 floors up. Vanessa sat motionless, jaw clenched, staring at the closed laptop, as though she could will it to rewind. She didn't yet understand what had been given to her. Neither did I. But I knew one thing: we were both standing on the same cracked foundation, again staring at the ruins of a family, wondering what could still be saved. If you're still listening up to this point, type 1 in the comments. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive early. It only shows up when we're finally brave enough to face it. The moment the screen went black, silence took over. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that presses against your chest until breathing feels like work. Vanessa sat frozen, mascara smudged hands trembling in her lap. The lawyer's leather folder lay between us like a loaded weapon that hadn't gone off yet. Then she moved. The chair screeched across marble. She stood, pointing a shaking finger straight at me. You did this, she hissed. You manipulated her. You made her feel guilty when she was dying. Her voice cracked, but the venom stayed. I shook my head slowly. Vanessa, I didn't even know she was sick until Harold called me last month. That's a lie, she shouted. You must have found a way to reach her. You've always been calculating. Her words hit like stones thrown from a child's hand, small but painful, because I knew they came from a place of confusion, not cruelty. Harold raised both palms. Miss Caldwell, please, no, she snapped, spinning toward him. My mother built that empire from scratch. He left us when we had nothing. How could she give him everything? Her reflection trembled in the window, a woman made of steel, and cracks the city behind her, glittering like applause that had turned its back. I stood slowly. I didn't leave because I stopped loving either of you. I left because love was no longer something we recognized. Vanessa laughed, bitter and sharp. That's rich coming from a man who couldn't handle a strong woman. I didn't answer. Some truths can't be defended. They just sit there waiting to be understood. Harold cleared his throat softly, that calm professionalism back in place. For the record, your mother's mental state was evaluated by 3 separate psychiatrists before this will was finalized. All confirmed she was fully competent. She was medicated. Vanessa cried, her voice trembling with rage. She didn't know what she was signing. Your mother anticipated this objection, Harold replied gently. She reaffirmed her wishes in front of witnesses, all under video documentation. Vanessa's jaw clenched. Then I'll sue. Harold didn't flinch. You're free to consult counsel. However, Mrs. Caldwell also included a challenge clause. Any attempt to dispute this will invalidate your inheritance. The air changed again. The room seemed to shrink, pulling its walls closer. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, her confidence faltered. You're lying, she whispered, but it sounded like a plea, not an accusation. Harold slid a page across the table. It's right there, Ms. Caldwell, Section 9. She scanned the page, eyes darting over the legal text, her breathing uneven. When she reached the final line, the paper slipped from her fingers. Her voice broke. She wouldn't do that to me. I walked to the window, staring out at the skyline Evelyn had once called her cathedral of ambition. The city hadn't changed, but I had. I'd spent decades running from ghosts, only to find myself standing in the tallest one of all. Vanessa's reflection appeared beside mine in the glass. Same eyes, same stubborn set to the mouth, same need to win every argument. She was her mother's daughter. You think this makes you the hero? Now, she said bitterly. The noble ex-husband who gets rewarded for being a failure. I turned toward her. No, Vanessa. It makes me the man your mother finally remembered. Her lip trembled, but she masked it with a glare. She destroyed everything, she whispered. And now you're finishing the job. No, I said softly. I'm rebuilding it with honesty this time. For a moment she looked lost, a woman who'd spent so long defending her mother's myth that she didn't know how to exist without it. Harold closed his briefcase quietly. Perhaps we should take a break, he suggested. But I shook my head. No need. Vanessa's eyes burned through me. You don't get to act righteous, Dad. You abandoned us. I didn't abandon you. I said, my voice low but steady. I left what we'd become, the lies, the betrayal, the competition. I walked away from a war your mother had already declared. Her silence was louder than shouting. Finally, she whispered, I hate you. I know, I said. But hate doesn't last forever. Neither does truth if you ignore it. She turned away, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her anger in place. The city lights reflected across the table like broken glass. Evelyn's empire glittered in every surface, and for the first time it looked fragile. Harold stood adjusting his jacket. We'll resume tomorrow morning, he said softly. There are further provisions to review. Vanessa didn't answer. She stared out at the skyline, eyes wet, mascara streaking like ink running from a story she no longer believed in. I wanted to comfort her, but some distances can't be crossed in one night. You have to build new bridges, one brick of truth at a time. As Harold gathered the documents, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not vindication. Just a quiet realization that justice, when it finally comes, doesn't roar. It breathes. Outside, a single seagull cut across the skyline wings, catching the last gold of sunset. And I thought maybe Evelyn was right. Maybe this wasn't revenge. Maybe it was redemption dressed as consequence. When the elevator doors closed behind Vanessa, the sound echoed like an old memory shutting itself. For a long time, I just stood there, hands in my pockets, watching the lights flicker down the hall, until it was only me, Harold, and the quiet hum of a city that didn't care who had just lost or won. Harold began stacking papers again, careful, deliberate, like every document might shatter if handled too roughly. "I've seen a lot of families in rooms like this," he said, his voice low. "Some end in lawsuits, some in silence. Yours might be the first one with a pulse." "A pulse," I repeated, almost smiling. "That's something." I sank back into the chair Vanessa had just vacated. The air still smelled faintly like her perfume, sharp, expensive, impatient. My chest ached in that place where anger used to live. "She's not ready to see what this really is," I said quietly. "No one ever is," Harold replied. "Truth sounds like betrayal when you've been living on lies." I looked at the documents spread across the table, signatures, seals, witnesses, decades of choices condensed into neat paragraphs. Somewhere between the legal phrasing and Evelyn's recorded voice, I realized the fight was over. The war that had started in our kitchen 20 years ago had finally run out of ammunition. I took off my glasses, rubbed my temples, and laughed softly. "She still found a way to control the room," I said. Harold smiled. Even from the grave, we both laughed quietly because it was true and because it hurt. I walked over to the window again. The night was swallowing the skyline one building at a time. Below us, headlights streamed through the streets like veins of light in a living, breathing creature. I used to think success looked like that busy, loud, unstoppable. But standing there, I realized success was quieter. It was being able to breathe without bitterness. Harold joined me at the window. "You don't seem angry," he said. I admitted, for a long time. "But anger's just a house you live in after everyone's moved out." He nodded slowly. "What will you do now?" I thought about the company, the employees, the buildings with my last name on them that hadn't been mine for decades. I thought about Vanessa storming into the elevator with a face full of rage and heartbreak. And then I thought about Evelyn, her final words, her trembling hand reaching for the camera, her plea for forgiveness. "I'll run the company for now," I said finally. "Not for profit, for purpose. It was built on lies. Maybe it's time to rebuild it on something real." Harold studied me carefully. "And Vanessa, she's my daughter," I said, still watching the traffic below. "She doesn't know it yet, but she's still part of this, whether she hates me or not." I turned back toward the table, gathered the stack of documents into one neat pile, and handed them to Harold. "Keep them safe. I'll come back tomorrow." He nodded. "You'll need security. Reporters will hear soon." "I've handled worse than microphones," I said with a tired grin. He laughed quietly. "You sound like a man who's made peace with his past." "Not peace," I said. "Perspective." When I stepped outside, the cold New York air hit me with the clarity of baptism. The city was loud again, horns, footsteps, a man yelling for a cab. But for once, it didn't feel hostile. It felt alive. A street musician played a slow blues riff on a saxophone near the curb. I stopped for a moment, dropped a 20 in his case. He nodded without breaking rhythm. As I walked toward my old Chevy parked between two luxury sedans, I realized something I hadn't felt in years: gratitude. Not for the money, not for the revenge I never wanted, but for the chance to start again at 72 of all ages. When I got back to my small Santa Monica apartment later that night, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window overlooking the ocean. The Pacific was dark and endless waves rolling like quiet prayers. I thought about Evelyn's last words. Family doesn't end with failure. It begins again with forgiveness. For 20 years, I'd mistaken forgiveness for weakness. But tonight, under the hum of city lights and the rhythm of waves, I finally understood. Forgiveness isn't surrender. It's release. I used to think faith meant asking God for something I whispered. But maybe faith is what's left when you stop asking, when you just start doing the right thing anyway. I closed my eyes, let the sound of the ocean fill the room, and felt peace stretch its long, quiet hand across my heart. No applause, no cameras, no vengeance, just grace. Tomorrow I'd face Vanessa again. Not as an enemy, not even as her father, but as a man trying to rebuild something honest in a family made of ghosts and glass. The morning light in Santa Monica has a way of softening everything it touches, even regret. It poured through my kitchen window that next day, washing over the chipped countertops and the faded blue tiles Evelyn once picked out when money was still tight and dreams were still shared. I brewed my coffee the way I always had, slow, measured, unhurried. After all that noise in New York, the shouting, the accusations, the truth dropping like grenades, the sound of the kettle whistling felt like mercy. The company files Harold had couriered overnight sat on my table sealed in an expensive leather folder. They looked absurd in my modest apartment. A $27 million empire in a room with second-hand furniture and a wobbly ceiling fan. I sat down, opened the folder, and stared at the first page, Caldwell Estates Ownership Transfer and Strategic Direction. Below my name, Evelyn's signature appeared one last time. Neat, elegant, decisive, the same way she used to sign love notes on napkins before boardrooms replaced breakfast tables. My throat tightened. "I guess you still found a way to make me finish your work, Maggie," I murmured. I hadn't called her Maggie in decades, but the name fit again this morning. The girl who used to draw plans beside me on diner placemats, not the woman who became the ice queen of Manhattan. By 9, I was sitting in Harold's office again. He looked surprised when I walked in, wearing my old gray blazer instead of a tailored suit. "You're early," he said. "I've had 20 years to think about this meeting," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Coffee, please. The kind that doesn't cost $12. We both chuckled, and it broke the tension before the work began. "I spent the night going through her notes," I said, sliding the folder across his desk. "She left everything planned, every account, every property, every clause." Harold nodded. "She did. Evelyn was nothing if not thorough." "I want to keep the company running," I said. "But not the way she did. The real estate side will stay. People need homes. But I want part of the profits to fund something better." Harold leaned forward. "What are you thinking?" I took a deep breath. "A foundation," I said. "For construction workers, the ones who build everyone else's fortune and can't afford their own rent. Call it the Evelyn Redemption Foundation." Harold's eyebrows lifted. "That's poetic." "It's practical," I said. "She spent her life climbing ladders. Maybe it's time her name built some instead." He studied me for a moment, the way lawyers do when they're trying to decide if they're talking to a client or a cause. "Evelyn would approve," he said quietly. "I'm not sure about that," I replied, "but maybe she'd understand." For the next 2 hours, we built the framework, a nonprofit wing attached to Caldwell Estates scholarships, for trade schools, housing projects, for veterans' health care benefits, for site workers. Every plan felt like laying bricks on a foundation I'd abandoned long ago. And somewhere in the middle of all those signatures and clauses, I felt something I hadn't in years: purpose. When we finished, Harold looked up and said, "Thomas, this is more than a foundation. This is restitution." I nodded. For her. For me. For everyone who got lost when success became the only language we spoke. He slid one last document toward me. "Then it's official." I signed my name again, this time with a steadier hand. The ink didn't bleed, and neither did my heart. As I left the office, the California sun hit my face bright and warm. A group of workers were renovating the building across the street. One of them, a young man covered in dust, lifted his hard hat and nodded at me as I passed. I nodded back. It was a simple exchange. No words, no headlines, just mutual respect. And I thought, this is what wealth should feel like. That night I went home and poured 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for Evelyn. Old habit, I guess. Her photo sat on the windowsill, the one from our first cafe opening, both of us smiling, like we had no idea how hard life could hit. "I did what you asked," I told her softly. "The company's safe. But it's not just a business anymore. It's a second chance for both of us." The Pacific outside rolled and shimmered under the moonlight. A faint breeze slipped through the curtains, and for a moment I swore I heard her laugh again, that unguarded, joyful sound I hadn't heard since we were kids, with a blueprint and a borrowed dream. I raised my cup toward the ocean. "To redemption," I said quietly. "And to the people who show up to finish what others started." That night, I sat at my old oak desk, the same one Evelyn and I bought for $50 at a garage sale in Queens, back when everything we owned fit in a borrowed pickup. The wood was scarred and uneven, but it had survived everything: our beginnings, our downfall, and now this strange kind of resurrection. Outside, Santa Monica was quiet. The ocean murmured like an old friend who didn't need to be heard to be understood. On the desk beside me lay 2 things: the first official document of the Evelyn Redemption Foundation, and a blank sheet of stationery with my name embossed at the top. That paper was waiting for something I'd avoided writing for 20 years, a letter to my daughter. I stared at it for a long time, pen poised, unsure where to begin. Apologies feel strange after decades of silence. They sound like songs played too late in the evening, when only the ghosts are listening. Finally, I wrote, "Dear Vanessa, your mother's last gift wasn't money. It was the truth. And though the truth can hurt, it also frees us from pretending. I know you think I came back to take something from you, but the truth is I came back to give something back, a foundation strong enough for both of us to stand on. You've lived most of your life in glass towers, afraid of cracks. But sometimes light only gets in through what breaks." I stopped reading those lines back. My hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from memory. You have your mother's brilliance and her fire. Use them differently. Build something she'd be proud of, not because of how tall it stands, but because of who it helps stand taller. I've asked Harold to offer you a position at the foundation, not as a formality, but as an invitation. I won't force you to accept. You can walk away and still keep what's yours. But if you choose to come back, you won't just be earning an inheritance, you'll be rebuilding a family. I don't need your forgiveness. I just hope you'll let me earn your trust. Love, always, Dad. I laid the pen down and read the letter twice the way I used to, double-check blueprints before pouring concrete. Everything had to be solid. Nothing could collapse. When I folded the letter, I slipped a photo inside the one from our first coffee shop opening. Evelyn in her yellow dress, Vanessa perched between us in a tiny apron that said, "Future Boss." Three people who once believed tomorrow would always be kind. I sealed the envelope and wrote her name in careful script. Vanessa Caldwell, Manhattan. Harold would deliver it along with the official papers and her new employment offer. I leaned back, exhaled, and for the first time in years, the silence in my apartment didn't feel empty. It felt earned. On the windowsill, Evelyn's photograph caught a glint of moonlight. The air stirred a faint sea breeze lifting the curtain, and from somewhere beyond the surf, a lone seagull called into the night. I smiled. Still watching, huh? The next morning, I woke before dawn. The world was silver and soft, the hour between darkness and forgiveness. I poured myself tea, opened the window, and let the wind carry in the sound of waves colliding with the shore. The letter was gone already in Harold's hands, already on its way to Manhattan. Whatever happened next was out of mine. I turned to Evelyn's picture one more time. "Maybe this is what you meant," I said quietly. "Not a second chance at love, but a second chance at doing right." Outside, the first sunlight touched the edge of the ocean, turning it to gold. And I thought maybe this is how faith works, not in prayers answered, but in bridges rebuilt. 3 years can feel like a lifetime when you're rebuilding something, especially when what you're rebuilding isn't a company, but a family. The Evelyn Redemption Foundation had grown faster than anyone expected. What started as a modest initiative, just a few grants for trade school students, had become a national program. Thousands of workers across the country had received support scholarships, housing, health coverage. Every check that left my desk felt like a brick in a wall Evelyn and I had promised to build 40 years ago. The corporate office of Caldwell Estates had changed too. The marble floors were still there, but the air felt different, lighter. The walls no longer echoed with the sound of ambition sharpened to a blade. Vanessa had returned 6 months after I sent the letter. No announcement, no lawyers. She just walked into the foundation office in Los Angeles one morning, wearing jeans, a white blouse, and a face stripped of its old armor. "I came to see what you're doing with Mom's company," she said. I smiled, "Then grab a hard hat. We've got a site visit." And that's how it began, not with apologies, but with work. She started as a project consultant. At first, she kept her distance, her tone clipped and professional. But little by little, the cold between us began to thaw. She learned the names of the construction crews, sat with them at lunch, visited the low-income housing projects we funded. The first time I heard her laugh, really laugh, was at a ribbon cutting for a veterans housing complex in San Diego. A little girl handed her a pair of scissors that were too big for her hands, and Vanessa knelt to help her hold them steady. For a moment I saw Evelyn in her, not the ruthless CEO, but the woman who once dreamed of helping people find homes, not just buy them. Now, 3 years later, Vanessa stood beside me on a stage draped in white fabric, looking out over the crowd gathered beneath the California sun. The new tower behind us gleamed glass and steel rising over Santa Monica, its reflection spilling into the Pacific. A banner stretched across the stage, "Evelyn Grace Tower, built on redemption." The same press that once printed rumors about our collapse was here now writing about our revival. Vanessa stepped forward to the microphone. Her voice was steady, warm. "My mother taught me how to build. My father taught me why we should." The crowd applauded softly, but the look she gave me after was louder than any applause could be. When she finished her speech, she turned to me and whispered, "Would you do the honors, Dad?" I nodded, stepping beside her. We each held a piece of the red ribbon. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine from the gardens below. Cameras flashed, and for a moment everything slowed: the crowd, the noise, the years between us. I thought of Evelyn watching from wherever forgiveness lives. Her laughter carried somewhere in that wind. Vanessa lifted the scissors, her hand brushing mine as we cut together. The ribbon fell fluttering to the ground like something finally released. Cheers erupted. The band struck up a hopeful tune. Confetti floated through the air like tiny pieces of sunlight. She leaned close and said quietly, "You know, I used to think Mom's empire was her legacy, and now I asked. Now I think it's this, us standing here together." I felt my throat tighten. "You sound like her," she smiled. "Maybe for once, that's a good thing." We stood there as the applause washed over us, father and daughter, two survivors of a story that once felt too broken to repair. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own name. The reporters called our names, asking for pictures. Vanessa took my arm, turned us toward the cameras, and said softly, "Let's give them something real this time." And we did not a photo of wealth or victory, but of something rarer: grace earned the hard way. The tower ceremony ended hours ago, but the applause still echoed somewhere inside me, not as noise but as warmth. That night I sat on the balcony of my small house overlooking the Pacific, a mug of tea steaming between my hands. The city glimmered behind me. The ocean breathed in front of me. And for the first time in a lifetime, both felt like home. A framed photo rested on the table beside me, the one taken that morning at the ribbon cutting. Vanessa and I shoulder to shoulder, smiling without posing. Behind us, the words Evelyn Grace Tower gleamed in sunlight. The press had called it a monument to redemption. To me, it was something quieter. It was proof that broken things can still stand if you rebuild them with love instead of pride. The waves rolled in and out, whispering like a prayer too old to forget its words. I lifted my mug slightly toward the horizon. "This is for you, Evelyn," I said softly. We finally finished what we started. A gull swooped low across the surf, its wings catching the last amber of daylight. I smiled. She was still watching somehow. Always had been. Later that evening, Vanessa stopped by. She'd traded her usual corporate heels for sneakers and carried takeout boxes from a little taco stand down the street. "Thought we should celebrate like normal people," she said, dropping the bag on the table. "Define normal," I teased. She laughed a real unguarded laugh and handed me a paper plate. We ate quietly for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't need fixing. Then she looked out at the ocean and said, "You know, I used to think faith was for people who needed something to hold on to. And now I asked." She smiled faintly. "Now I think it's for people who've already fallen and still find the strength to stand up again." I nodded. "Your mother would have liked that." She looked at me, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "You really forgive her, don't you?" I took a long breath. The air tasted like salt and closure. "I forgave her the day she told the truth," I said. "And I forgave myself when I stopped needing revenge to feel alive." She leaned back in her chair, eyes glistening in the moonlight. "You're a better man than I gave you credit for." "No," I said quietly. "Just one who finally learned that grace isn't weakness. We sat there until the waves blurred into the dark. The gulls had quieted, the air had cooled, and the stars began to scatter above the horizon like nails holding up the night. Before she left, Vanessa turned to me at the door. "Dad," she said softly, "thank you for giving me a chance to build something good out of what we broke." I smiled. That's what builders do. We fix what time and pride destroy. She hugged me then, hesitant at first, then real solid like a bridge finally finished. When she drove away, her taillights disappeared down the hill, leaving only the sound of the waves and the faint hum of the city beyond. I sat back down, let the night wrap around me, and whispered. She took my pride, but left me purpose. Money fades, marble cracks, but faith rebuilds everything. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint scent of salt and jasmine. I closed my eyes and listened to the ocean breathe. Forgiveness had turned into something bigger than closure. It had become creation, the act of making beauty from the ruins. For the first time in decades, I wasn't haunted by what I'd lost. I was grateful for what remained. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to Brianstories, share this video with someone who still believes in second chances, and tell me in the comments, what does faith mean to you now? Because in the end, that's the real inheritance, not wealth, not revenge, but grace.